Whether you're a plotter, you're going to start with beats and then build out an outline, or you're going to be a pantser who starts writing and then applies beats to what you're working on, or at
Yes.
some point incorporates beats and figures out what the beats are. I think there's just no escaping beats. I think if you're a writer, it's the best way to try to organize and create a functioning, interesting, compelling story. And it's also very easy to apply.
Hey, Writing Pursuits authors. Thank you for joining me today. This is the last episode of this season for 2023. I hope you'll join me in 2024 for the next season. I'm having surgery, so I know that I'll need a time to recover, and that's why I'm gone. In the meantime, watch or listen to past episodes to get caught up. And until next time, keep writing, my friends. Keep writing. Hey, Writing Pursuits authors, welcome back to the show. To those of you who are new, my name is Caprice McKee, and I'm glad you're here. Today, we welcome Kimboo York. Am I saying that right?
Yes, you are.
Kimboo? Okay. Yeah, so let me introduce you. Kimboo York is a Gen X elder goth. Did I get that right? Wow. Whose main life purpose is to provide a good life for her rescue mutt, Keely Boo, who is perfect and beyond reproach in every way. She is also a professional author, former project manager, and a librarian. Is that correct?
Yeah.
Who wears too many hats, which I totally understand. She's a bit grumpy. I didn't see that, but okay. And writes across multiple genres, including romance, fantasy, and nonfiction. And you can find her at houseofyork.info, which I love that website name.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I was excited when I got it. I was like, yes, that's the one I want.
Well, I couldn't believe that writingpursuits.com was available. I was like, what?
That is wild. No, in this day and age, that something that good would still be available.
I was dumbfounded, and it wasn't that long ago. So, wow. Well, so, like I said, I've been reading your latest book, I guess, the Become an Unstoppable Storyteller, How to Craft Compelling Serials, which is fascinating.
I think so.
Yeah. I had an interview with Christine Daigle, who has, I think, 2 or more Vella series.
Mm-hmm.
And she was telling me about how it had changed her outlook on writing quite a lot. And that because of the episodic approach to writing, and you don't know maybe what's completely over the horizon. You have maybe an idea of an end point,
mm-hmm.
or a stopping point, I guess, maybe not an end point, but a stopping point. And so that was fascinating business. And so this is really opening my eyes, because I started out as a pantser and have leaned towards more, the plotter kind of mindset. But this is fascinating stuff. So how did you start writing?
Well, I'm one of those very typical, I was a kid who wanted to write and grow up to be a writer stories. So that's not really, we all think that's fascinating when we tell it about ourselves, but it's pretty bog standard for most of the writers I know.
That's true.
I didn't get into professional original fiction publishing until I got, it's a circuitous route. I got into fan fiction again in 2007, 2008. And it got me back to writing. I'd kind of given up on ever having a writing career. The 90s were not kind.
No, they weren't.
No. And so, but when I got into back to fan fiction, it got me back to daily writing habit, a regular writing habit. And then from there, it got into writing original stories. And then I got picked up by a publisher, a small indie publisher, for my romance novels about 2010, 2011. Again, I did not really vibe with the that's such a wiggly term for not vibing with the publishing industry in the early self-publishing years.
Yes.
The rapid release, the focus on advertising, it was effective, and it still is effective. As I say in the book, that is not a bad method. There's nothing wrong with that.
Mm-hmm.
If that suits your mentality and your approach to writing. That was not me. And so I kind of, again, fell out of writing. I still did write. I published my big, which should have been a serial, my big novel, Wolves of Harmony Heights, in 2017. And that really started me on the journey of serial writing. Like you discussed that you talked with her about, I forget her name already, but yes, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
About writing novellas, and that too is my gateway drug. Like I went from like, wow, I really like writing this long, involved world building story. Why don't I just do this as novellas? And I was getting into that, and then pandemic,
Yes.
everything changed. And I know, right? And so it took me a few years to get back to it. And at that point, serializing as a method of sharing fiction stories was gaining traction. And at the start of this year, I joined Subscription for Authors Facebook group. And then I joined Ream, which is a new subscription platform that's out there, one of many. I don't want to make it like that's the only one that's there, but that's the one I'm on. And on Substack, where I do a lot of my nonfiction work, and where the start of Become an Unstoppable Storyteller hit up. So it's kind of like one of those circuitous, like I always knew I wanted to be a writer, but man, path has been.
Yes. Well, I have a similar story. Third grade, I wrote my first like mystery, I believe the message was hidden in the wall. Anyway, third grade. Anyway, and then, I got busy with life, like you said, and had kids and all that kind of stuff. And then I decided to get really serious about it. And just write for myself, kind of, and write something I thought my kids would enjoy. And I wrote it longhand, of all things. And because I was at sporting events and at the doctor, and I was, this and that and the other. So I always had the little spiral with me. And about the time I got around to the fourth book, I'm going, stack of spirals, I should go back to the beginning and actually write this. But I, like you, have written. I wrote the big long one, and then I wrote another one, and it's all in the same series, and wrote 2 novellas, which I love those. Man, it was like, boom, they were just there. They were so, I don't know, it was just so easy to write those. I hate to say easy, but it was much easier than writing the big ones, because you're always having to try to land that big plane. And so I think maybe I'm finding the path that I need to be on. And so I'm thrilled to be talking to you about it, because
awesome.
Yeah.
I found the same thing. And I think, the novellas. So I do have a series. It's not quite relaunched yet. It's called Dragon's Grail. The first novella is Escape from Ice Mountain. Very, very epic high fantasy type of novel with romance. I don't write romantic fantasy, but I write fantasy with romance. And
me too.
And the books are, the novellas, I designed them to be 30,000 word long, and man, I just love that length. I love that length for a story. And if you go back and you look at my fan fiction, most of my most popular fan fiction stories, bam, right in that 30,000 mark.
It's a sweet spot.
Yeah, it's a sweet spot. But on the flip side, I know I love world building, and I know I love long, complex, drawn out stories. And so this bridge of actually seeing it as a serial rather than just a novella or a novel or something like that has been a game changer for me, and has really changed the way I'm approaching my writing and my goals for my stories as well.
So for the listener, in a nutshell, can you define serial fiction and what makes it different from a novel or even from a novella? And are book series actually serial fiction?
So that's yes, all the questions. So the way I am defining it is that a novel and even a novella or even a short story are what I called like clamshell stories. There's a very tight beginning, middle, and end. And there's different genre expectations, but when you come down to it, they're a 3-act story structure, or they're the hero's journey, the 12, 13, never can remember, a lot of steps, or whichever one you're using, save the cat. There's this structure, and it just sits there, and you go through the beats, and then clamshell, that's the end of the story. A serial is a story that has an ongoing repetition of beats. So in the way that I've broken it down in my book is there is the long, big story arc. And the example I use is one people are very familiar with is, Frodo taking the ring to Mount Doom, right? That was the story arc of Lord of the Rings. However, there's a million words in that story, and there's a lot of different things going on. And if you piece it apart, you'll see that there are smaller structures within it. And that is how I define the serial. It is a large base framework story structure with smaller story structures inside of it and repeating, kind of like the television series. Every season you have a season, then you have another season, and then you have another season. They're all part of the same big story, but they all have their own beats and their own mini arcs, so to speak. So in a serial like that, it can go on for a very long time, depending on what you set the big story arc to be and how you feel about it. Like how far do you want to go down the rabbit hole? As a pantser, I really love that. I know that there are plotters who really want to have the structure of mapping everything out. It works either way. And I just love how that I can just keep going with a story that I want to just keep writing.
Well, I liked your spreadsheet because here it had, the shorter little thing going on, like you said, the repeating beats, and then over here to the side you had the long story arc. And I'm going, that's what I'm doing, because I've got this big long series in my head and I know where I want it to stop, because eventually maybe I might want to stop it. I don't know, maybe not, but I want to stop it at a certain place and call it done, at least. But it's a big overarching story, but each book has its own little thing going on.
Right. And to your question of whether a book series can be a serial, the question is yes. I think, I think my tendency is to think that true serials tend to have less shorter pieces, like shorter installments than you'd have with a book. But the heart of it is, do you have multiple story structures going on at the same time? Concurrently is the word I'm looking for there. I am a writer. Right. I can find words, but concurrently. And are they building up to something bigger? And a lot of book series do that in a lot of different ways. They don't have to if you don't want to. They can just be a series of books set in a village or a town, if you've got a mystery series. So it doesn't have to be that, but I think it does open up a lot of opportunities for storytelling if you look at it through the lens of it's a serial instead of a series of novels.
Right. I think that's a really good point. Yeah, the common village, the common setting, even the common well, that's usually what it is. Where you have repeating characters, you have repeating whatever, but they're standalone books. That's not quite as serial, what I think of as serial story, because it doesn't have maybe an overarching story.
That it would exactly be the difference. Like they're using the same characters, they're using the same sets and the same murder mystery. I think something like Murder, She Wrote, which is, very long running show.
Oh yeah.
Has that, like it's, the mystery of the week. And there were occasions in the series, if for those of us old enough to have watched it when it originally aired, that there were some arcs that ran through some of the series, but there wasn't a big overarching arc that ran across all of it. So that is not a serial, not by how I would define it.
Well, and also she didn't change that much.
Right. Yeah.
You know, she was the same at the beginning as she pretty much was at the end. You know, she didn't have this long, she didn't have a character arc, much of one. It was pretty flat.
Right. Yeah.
So I think that may be a sign there, because I think readers are going to want more change over time.
I think
if it's a serial fiction,
absolutely, that is so important. And even if you're dealing with a flat character, like a lot of times if you talk about video games, there's flat characters that go on for a long time. But if you're going to do it, you can do it with flat characters, but then you have to do a lot of changing around them. You have to have even if you're not developing their character art, there has to be a lot of change going on to keep people invested. And whether that's a journey across the seas, but I think what I find is that eventually, even people who didn't intend to start out with a big character arc, they get into writing serials, they're going to start changing their characters. The characters are going to develop this character arc because you're simply creating so much material for that character to live through and to feel and to exist. It's going to affect them eventually.
It's not going to feel real if they don't. I completely agree with you. I completely agree with you. So I was wondering, something you said at the beginning of the book made me wonder, did manga play a part in your serial series realization? How's that? Journey, I almost said serialization.
Yeah, and for listeners, serialization is simply the act of spreading out a story in installments, but you can do a serialization of a novel or a novella or an epic poem. Like, it doesn't matter. A serial is what we're talking about here, is a distinct literary form to make it sound very highfalutin. And yes, actually, manga did have, now I'm not a huge manga or anime fan, but I'm adjacent to it simply because of my interest in fantasy stories. And I was aware that these very long running series were going on. I mentioned Berserker in the book. One Piece, which just got a Netflix show based on it, has been going on for 20 years now.
Oh my goodness.
I think. Yeah. And one of the things that I thought of One Piece earlier when you were talking, because you were like, if the character has somewhere to go, and the author of One Piece, the manga writer, he's promised the readers that yes, there will be a resolution. Like, you're not just reading this for 20 years for no reason. There is a plan in place. He's had to make that promise because it's gone on so long that people love it. So but it did help. And then of course, as I talk about in the book, my interest in Chinese and other Asian dramas, television show dramas, and especially shows like Nirvana and Fire or The Untamed, really opened my eyes to different ways of looking at story structure and how we can take those lessons and apply them to Western style story structures that we're more familiar with.
Okay. Well, that made me wonder. I was just thinking while you were talking about that when, and this is going to seem really weird, but when I was reading books to my kids early on, we got hooked on Hank the Cowdog. And I, had only seen the first like 2 or 3 books, and we got the books on tape. Yes, it was old enough for books on tape, right? And lots of road trips. But then I was stunned to find out that there were more than 30. And he had just gone with it. And they did change the characters changed over time. Like the little boy, he grew up, and I think a little sister, and this and that, the other happened. But I was just amazed that there were so many, but he had just
kept going.
Knocked him out. Yeah. And he didn't really have to have an ending. He just kept adding on to the stories and being ridiculous, but
which is a danger that can happen as well. But and there's nothing wrong with that. But it's one reason why I I suggest for authors, if they're thinking of doing a serial, that they do consider the long arc. Even if you're a pantser, I'm very much a pantser, and I'm very, very, but I come in later and I add the beats. And so if I know that I'm writing to a beat, I don't really have to know how it happens. I just need to know that that's the thing that needs to happen eventually, or needs to happen next. And so having that very large arc available to me as beats helps me stay focused on the whole story, if that makes sense.
Yes. Yes. And I love the idea of paring it down to beats. Because that's what a story's made of. So
whether you're a plotter, you're going to start with beats and then build out an outline, or you're going to be a pantser who starts writing and then applies beats to what you're working on, or at some point incorporates beats and figures out what the beats are. I think there's just no escaping beats. I think it's like, if you're a writer, it's the best way to try to organize and create a functioning, interesting, compelling story. And it's also very easy to apply. So I love beats too. I'm like, yes, beats. There's so
I'm somewhere in between. I think you mentioned that. I like I said, I started out as pantser. I just was starting to write, and I said, can I get to the end of a book? Can I stick with it long enough to finish a book? And yes, and it just kept going, and so then I had to go back. But anymore, I try to figure out what the end point is, and kind of maybe a couple of points in between. But that little plot, that little outline never survives contact with the real battle that goes on the page.
Right. So, yep. It's once it's engaged, all bets are off. That's certainly true for me. That's very true for me. Oh my God.
Although
I'm working.
Yeah.
Huh?
No, go ahead.
I was saying I'm working on my new serial. It's called Transmigrated Terry, and it's a portal fantasy. It's a older middle-aged woman who dies and gets thrown into the world of her favorite fantasy series. And yeah, it's a lot of fun. I've started posting it on Ream. I'm writing it. It's what I call Al-Quran. I'm posting it as I write.
Sorry about
that. That is really important for me. Like, I know the character arc of Terry, right? I know what she's going to go through on this, what's going to be a very long serial. But like you said, I know the beat that I'm going to get to down the road. I know what I'm aiming for. And I know there's going to be things that come up that, because I am a pantser, there's going to be things come up I didn't plan for, but I still know that I can kind of herd the crowd toward what I want. And that's, to me, what makes it a serial, because I do have all the adventures I have planned for her. There's still that point at the end that she's going to get to.
How do you overcome the fear of like really going wrong?
It's the best and the worst advice that anybody could ever give a writer, which is do it anyway. Here's the thing. I think and so this is geared a little bit more towards pantsers, because that's what I am, but I think it does apply to plotters and other types of planners as well. I think being flexible is always a good idea, and knowing where you're going is, even if it's way far down the road, is having that pin on the wall will help you keep from getting too far down unbeaten path. Like you're off the trail, right? Like you're off the ranch. There's nothing there. But that said,
you found the end of the world.
It's like you just went. We have no idea. There's ships. But what are we doing now?
What are we doing now?
Oh gosh, I've done that so much. But here's the thing that I really want to stress. If you're building a long-running serial and you're focusing it as a serial, the byways are going to be just as interesting to your readers as the main plot points.
I love that.
You can see that in of course, Lord of the Rings. Like, there are some real I like Tom Bombadil, like what even, right? Like nobody knows what happened there. He just went on this little excursion, Tolkien. All right, we'll go with you. And I in the book, I also use Chronicles of Narnia. I think the third or the fourth book, I get them mixed up. But one of them is a flashback to before the main story even happens.
Yeah.
And people were thrilled to read it because they wanted the history. They wanted the backstory of what happened in Narnia. And don't be too afraid of it if you know you're going to be able to make it back on the main path,
I
right?
love that.
Because readers, if you get readers invested, especially in a long-running serial, and they are invested. They are invested, and they will not mind if you're doing the backstory of, the stepmom of the second character and their adventure with the dog. Like they're going to love it. And so don't be too afraid of it, I guess is my point.
I guess the thing they did there, well, like Tolkien, he made it an episode. It wasn't something that he would just got way off at tangent. He never came back. It was an episode, and then he rejoined the main story and went on with it. I can see people, I do get beginner writers who they don't know who the point of view character is. And 20 chapters in, we're still not sure who the main character is. And it's like I have to coach them. Look, you need to have somebody for the reader to root for. They have to relate to somebody and start rooting for them and pulling for them to succeed and overcome their obstacles. But then at that point, I don't think it's harmful to go off on a little tangent, as long as you bring it back.
That is an excellent point. And again, back to the idea of having that point where you know what you're doing, where you're going with the character, who the protagonist is. And if you've got a very big story with lots of characters, new writers can just become really interested in this character or that character and kind of drift away. But if you know the protagonist is, or at least the set of, like, you can't have a group of protagonists. That's a thing that can happen. But that's more an advanced level thing, I think. But whatever your choice is there, if you've got that idea of what the long arc is, what the long story arc is, and the beats that you're using there, you can go down to Tom Bombadil's little poetic hut in the woods and but still come back to Frodo's got to take the ring to Mordor.
Right.
And never losing track of that. I think if you've got that in your mind and you keep that on the horizon, no matter how far you go off track, you're going to be steering back to it.
Okay, I want to make sure that people understand the long arc. And I see that in like the Star Wars movies.
Right.
There's 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3 kind of where you have, well, when I saw the original movie, which was the fourth movie, then you had the intro, and then you had the really bad thing, which was the second movie, and then you had the triumphant movie. So, and then it started over again with Anakin, which was really prequel, same thing, where the second movie was a really dark, things go bad, and then you got to the resolution at the end. So I just want to make sure people understand what that long arc is.
So the long arc is not just the goal. So let's take the original series, like A New Hope and Empire Strikes Back and Return of the Jedi. Like opinions vary, but everybody knows those stories, right? So the long arc of that one is Luke Skywalker becoming triumphant. He is the main protagonist, and it is his personal journey. And we go through a lot of byways with Princess Leia and Han Solo and C-3PO and everybody, but that is the long arc. So no matter what happens in those 3 movies, it's going to come back around to what's Luke doing, what situation is he in, and how is he going to vanquish the Empire and Darth Vader and his own personal fears. Like, that is the long arc of the original 3 movies, right? So the smaller arcs, what we're talking about is the shorter arcs that are what I call the seasons. You could look at the whole movie as a season, like Empire Strikes Back, Dark Knight of the Soul. That's a whole season with its own 3-point arc that goes through without losing track of where Luke is in his long arc story, his heroic journey of coming through. His heroic journey is not the first movie. The heroic journey is all 3 movies.
All 3 together. Right.
Yeah. So that's long arc. And I think one of the reasons we fall back on using television shows as examples, because a lot of people can kind of visualize that.
Right.
So, I try to think of ones like something like Supernatural, which had a lot of seasons.
Wow, did it ever?
Right. And I'm not going to say that all of those seasons had a long arc. I think there were some shorter seasons that had their own arcs that were long arcs through the show and through the television episodes. But if you think about it that way, of like, here's a season, here's an episode, here's the installment of this part of the story leading towards a bigger story, or just being a part of like a gear shifting off to the side, how did that affect the long arc? Then you can get to some really interesting things, but you got to have that.
There was a lot of episodes in that Supernatural where they were searching for their father. So that was, kind of something that was woven through. And I think that lasted for 2 or 3 seasons.
I think it's the first 3. Boy, I'm going back in my brain now.
It's too far in the back, in the fog. But I remember that being one really long thread, and then they found it, and then things, boy, did they ever go crazy, and so there was that whole thing there too, and then another long thread.
And that's exactly, those long threads were the long arc of the brothers searching for their father, and what they're really searching for is their own sense of place and their own sense of family, right? So that's the actual character arc of what they're going through. But they have the monster of the week, and they have their little side projects trying to find their father, and somebody saw him in Kansas or whatever, and so they have to go there. And that's where the serial really starts building up and building a lot of world building and a lot of character development, and makes it interesting. So you're not really you want them to find their father, but on the other hand, you're like, you don't really care, because what's interesting to you is the journey that they're on.
Is the journey. Right. Okay. I really, really, you're just making a convert out of me here. That's all there is to it. So I let's shift gears just a little bit, because I studied your website, House of York .info, guys. And you have all these ways to find your work. And I know that you have changed the way that you sell your fiction. And so I would like you to kind of talk about your journey there. How did you start, and how are you doing it now?
Well, the start was, or the restart was, still a very traditional mindset of write novels, publish the novels, sell the novels. And then when I found out about or explored more platforms like Ream and Substack, or even Patreon, which a lot of authors are on, I started looking at, well, how could I use that to advertise my novels? And in the back of my mind, always back there, was the idea of, kind of like you, I'm not really digging the writing of the novel. There was so much more I wanted to do. There was bigger story arcs that I had in mind. And when I was writing Wolves of Harmony Heights, and that's a story I talk about in the book, it's almost 200,000 words, and I still felt like I was rushing the ending, because I was like, oh gosh, I can't have it be longer than 2,000 words. That's just too long for a novel. And it is.
That's the limit.
Yeah, that's kind of the upper limit for a novel, unless you're, G.R.M. Martin or something.
Yeah.
Yeah, one of the big names, but
they get more pages.
Right, right. They get fewer edits. That's thinking. Ooh, I didn't say that. But and it was kind of the confluence of those things all coming together at the end of last year that I realized what I really want to do is I really want to write serials. I really want to write those involved long running things. And so when I looked at the platforms at that time, and Ream was a brand new one, you know, there's
That's REAM for anybody.
yeah,
That'll be in the
yep,
show
that's and they're still in development as far, I mean, they've launched. There's still some features that they don't have that some people are waiting on. But it's kind of like a cross between Patreon and Wattpad. And that's what I was looking for. I was looking for something where there could be a reading experience for readers that would still draw them into my ecosystem. And
Right.
here was the big mindset change for me when I realized I was going to go to writing serials, was that I didn't want to be a purveyor of products. I wanted to be a purveyor of experiences.
Got it.
I wanted to create that for people so that if they subscribe to me, they're not subscribing to get a chapter. I mean, they are, but what they're really subscribing to is the experience that I can give them with my world building and my characters. And that's a mindset thing. It's like, you know, technically it's kind of the same, but for me, that changed everything. When I thought of it that way, I was like, yes, I can build this world and bring people in who want to be there. And
Perfect.
that's what really mattered.
You really have, and it's a much faster, I don't want to say this, it sounds like I'm talking complete business, but it's a much faster acquisition cycle because all you have to have is a chapter and then the next chapter and then the next chapter. You don't have to have the 100,000 word book that takes forever to get to market, that takes forever for your readers to get. And this way they can get the installments, and it's, you know, it's a regular
it keeps
installment.
it alive. Yeah.
It keeps it alive in their mind.
Builds community. It's awesome.
Okay.
It's awesome. Now, I do hear writers worry, and this was something I got over because I wrote fan fiction for years, you know, concerned about, well, it's not a finished product. Like you're writing a chapter and you're putting it up. And that's true. But what we found, and there are a lot of writers who are, we talk about this a lot on that particular Facebook group, a lot of writers are finding that their readers actually like that. They feel like they're getting a behind the scenes experience of seeing the rough draft. And we just say, like, at the point where this is going to be available in a omnibus form or a book form or publishing the individual novella or however we're doing it, it will be a little different because it will have gone through a more strict, you know, editing process, a more formal editing process.
Right.
But these insights, these chapters that we're just throwing out there, like readers are really eating that up. Readers really love that. They love like feeling like they're in on the gig, you know. And so
right.
not as scary as a lot of people think it is if you just get your work out there and start sharing it.
I had an interesting conversation with JP Reinflesh just a few weeks ago, and he and AB, I feel terrible. I'll have to look up his name.
I'm terrible with names.
Well, they have this, they have a Vella series, and they think of it as seasons. And when they're done with the season, then they work to getting that out as a book on Amazon or wherever, maybe other places too.
Right.
Because I noticed that you went really wide, you know, with your work, and kudos. That's kind of like on my to-do list. But I love that idea that it's not finished necessarily. It's not to the maybe to the height of polish that you would do for a published novella, but then they have the chance to go back around and finish it out and maybe take some of that reader input to tweak a few things, you know, before they put out the finished book. Oops,
yeah. A lot of serial authors are doing that, and that's certainly what I plan on doing with my Dragon's Grail series when I get back, because that's the one that's based on the 30,000 word novella. Even though I'm going to be publishing it serially, and each scene is about 1,500 words, each installment, you know, the novella itself is going to be 30,000, and then gonna publish that and have that available both on my website for direct sales and then wide, of course. So that's definitely my plan as well. And to me, that's the beauty of doing something like this, because you're not just hitting one market. You're not just hitting the people who like to read books. You're like hitting the people who like to read stories online in installments that are serial or serialized, and also hitting people who want to buy the whole book. Like, you're just expanding your market. I don't see any downside personally.
Yeah, it's like they can collect it. They can get the whole collection.
Yeah. Wow. Some authors are really going to town with that too. There's this one author named Chris Hopper. He does fantasy, mostly science fiction though. And he has his own website. He has a tech background, so he built it for his membership. And it's just exploding. He's got these little trinkets he sends out to all these members that are like a poker card.
But
like
he's
a poker
gamified
thing.
it.
Yes, he's gamified it. And so
Wow.
if you join up, you get the little poker chip, and that's specially printed. He has them designed, and they're special edition ones that people can buy.
Wow.
And
That's epic.
I know, it's amazing. And even graphic novels, online graphic novels. I don't know if you're familiar with Lackadaisy. Have you heard about that? What?
No, I'm not familiar with that. But
So
fantastic.
Lackadaisy is an online web graphic novel.
Oh, like yeah, graphic novels.
Yeah,
what do they call those?
I call them graphic novels because I'm old. So I'm like,
Webtoons.
Yeah, web comics, webtoons.
Yeah, something like that.
It's about it's a bunch of cats in 1927 St. Louis jazz. It's amazing, beautiful
That's
art.
great.
They just did a Kickstarter for almost $2 million. They raised almost $2 million to do animated versions of their stories.
Wow.
One of the things that they've done is they've given all these extra perks. So when you think about what you can do with a serial, it's not that different than what you can do with a Kickstarter. You can give people special print editions. You can give people bookmarks or limited edition prints of covers. So when you're thinking of serializing and having a subscription, it opens up a lot of different ways to engage readers, more than just please leave me a review at Goodreads. Like, you can really get people, and if they love it, like Chris Hopper, his fans are fanatic. They do meetups all over the country. I mean, he's really building his own, empire. And he just started earlier this year with it. So, I mean, he already had some rabid fans, but he's done a great job with that. He gamified it, and he's just having a blast. He has so much fun with it. And to me, that is the experience I want. I want to have fun with my readers. I want people who love my writing, who love my stories, who love my characters, who want more of that, who want the experience.
Well, I think that is a great goal to have, because what's the point of not ever having any interaction with your readers? I'm always thrilled to meet a reader of mine. And so what could be better than doing that on a more regular basis?
Right.
And just also every once in a while.
knowing you're giving the readers what they really want. It's just, they're feeding your muse and you're feeding their happiness. And it's just a great feeling. It's a feeling that I used to get a lot when I wrote fan fiction, because those are very, tight communities depending on the fandom. And it's what I want to build for my own readers, is that fandom community based on my stories. That's the dream.
So you're more going direct instead of absolutely relying on like the normal path of Amazon.
I've done Amazon so many ways. Like, Amazon's like a bad ex,
Yes.
Like, yeah.
X has a whole other meaning now.
Oh yeah. Oh gosh, you're right. I didn't even think about that. Oh man, that's so painful. I've done KU. I've done Amazon exclusive. I've done Amazon with some wide. And when I realized that I wanted to go also to direct sales on my own site, which I'm still getting that up and running
working on that.
Yeah, I'm still working on that. Like, as you said earlier, like that's a big project.
Yes.
And I found out that it's a big one. And so going wide for me is again about casting that net to all my readers. And especially in this day and age, as an IT person, as a person has a background in information technology, and as a librarian, that's what my master's degree is in.
Which is also information technology.
Yes, exactly. It's all information technology and information and knowledge management and all of that. And I love it. I love it. To me, that's just a good time. I know that does not ring true with everybody, but it does for me. But one of the things I do know is that the readership of ebooks is international. And that was really hit home with me when I got into the Untamed fandom, just based on a web novel called The Grandmaster of Demonic Cultivation. I do talk about that in the book. It's one of my big fandoms. I love it. Like, literally, that web novel has been read by multiple billions of people.
That's just outstanding.
It blows my mind when I was looking at the numbers of it. And there are other Asian web novels that have those kind of numbers. And then it made me realize, there are people all over the world who want to read fantasy novels and who want to read romance novels. And so going wide for me wasn't just about, oh, I don't want to be on Amazon. It was finding ways to open my writing and my work up to multiple markets all around the world. And that was certainly a goal for me. So that was a major impulse in going wide.
Wow. But yes, you're right. And I think that means if you just kind of like test the wind, they're ahead of us, perhaps, in that. But did you say it was Chinese or?
Chinese. Yeah. The Chinese web novel industry is not great for the writers. It's terrible as far as like how it's set up for paying them and giving them control over their intellectual properties. But if you look at just the numbers and the number of readers and the types of fandoms, I mean, I admit I have been humbled by Chinese and Asian fandoms, whether they're Korean or Taiwanese or Chinese or Japanese. Like, those fans, like, you do not understand the level of fandom until like the fans take over a local Kentucky Fried Chicken to drape big printouts of their favorite characters all over the walls. Like, I'm just, that's not my local Kentucky Fried Chicken, let me tell you. So,
it does make you wonder
amazing.
If part of that is the fact that there may not be as much choice for that market in the number of authors that are producing for it. But I do think that the growth curve is just beginning in the US, the UK, Canada, the English speaking world. It's just beginning, and it's going to take off and be huge. I think you're right about the trend.
Yeah, I do. And I think it's especially with the serialization and serials coming back into the scene, with you have to, and I hit home with this. I used to work in higher ed. That was my day job before I retired, and for a university. And these kids today, any kid born after, say, 1995 has been raised in an environment where they're constantly reading online.
Right.
And there's pros and cons. Like, I'm not going to get into that, but the fact is that they are used to reading online. They're used to reading on their phone, and they're coming of age and they're looking for things to read. Like you said, I mean, the market is just, both for ebooks and for online subscriptions, serialization platforms, gonna boom. It's just, I totally believe that.
They were also raised in the age of binging.
Yeah.
So when I was a kid, I mean, there's 3 channels to begin with. Well, 4 if you count a PBS. And we didn't have cable. So if I was going to watch a program, it came on once a week, and I had to really, live by the TV guide, right?
TV guide, yes. Like, you were going, like, you memorized the TV. When is the reruns happening? And
is that going to happen? Right. So my kids, though, they have I mean, even the oldest ones have been raised in an environment of being able to watch, and more so binging a program, binging a whole season of whatever it is.
Mhm.
And so they're used to that episodic atmosphere. They've been raised on Serial.
Yeah, they really have. They really have. And like I was talking about with manga, you know, these mangas go back 20, 30 years, some of them. And a lot of kids have been raised, grew up reading these and are still reading
We're
these
still reading.
stories, you know, and they just expect them to go on. And they've had it their whole life. Why would it leave? Like, why would it end? Why would it go away? And,
What is it? Prince Valiant is still in the comic strips from.
And let me tell you, I loved Prince Valiant, man. I would look forward to Prince Valiant every week. That should have been my tip right there.
Right
Of
there.
what my natural
It should have
inclination
been our
was.
clue.
Should have been a clue. Yes, Prince Valiant. Oh my gosh.
Oh
Loved
my
it, loved
goodness.
it, loved it.
So, well, I think that's all the time we have. I
All
just
right.
cannot thank you enough, Kimboo, for coming on and talking about serials and kind of opening our eyes to it. And I love your book that's become an unstoppable storyteller, how to craft compelling serials, guys.
Yep.
And
And
they'll be in the show notes.
good.
So,
And just so everybody knows, it was available direct only for a little while, but now it's available on all the major platforms. So
all
you
the
can get
platforms,
it
I noticed
anywhere.
that. So get it anywhere you like to get your books. And you don't have to go to Amazon. So and be sure to leave a review everywhere you go.
I would appreciate it. Thank you. But yeah,
Yeah.
thank you for having me on. It's a topic I love.
pleasure.
Obviously it's something fun, and I love opening people's eyes to the possibilities of this new form of telling a story.
The new old form. It's wonderful.
New old form.
Thank you, Kimboo. I appreciate it.
Not a problem. Thank you.
Thanks for joining us for this last episode of the season for 2023. Join us again in 2024. In the meantime, go back to the backlist and watch or listen to the episodes. Leave your comments below. Give us a like, subscribe so that you don't miss the next season. Meanwhile, keep writing, my friends. Keep writing.